Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. But there's one thing that really awkward happened that the presenter the presenter is not has not shown up yet. So today we're gonna talk about a multi-cluster service, and I have heard about this feature from them before. So while we are waiting, let me tell you a little bit about this multi-cluster service, and if they um won't show up later, we can finish this show earlier and reschedule another one to tell us about this feature. Um, okay, so and also we have Jianjun here today, so uh, if I say anything that is not correct, keep me honest, please, Jianjun.
Yeah, no problem. I'm glad to be here, guys.
Thanks for joining us because I know that it's like the last minute notice for you. So okay, so I'll go ahead and share my screen. Let's see what I have here. So when we do the rehearsal of this show, Lan showed me something like this. So, and I will show this to you. Mm, oh, by the way, Jinjin sent me
Yeah,
uh
I sent you a dog actually.
yeah, could you send that in the comments so everyone can
Yeah,
open that?
let me do it.
Okay. Yeah, so here's what I learned from the um let's draw it again. So for example, the multi-cluster service is something like this. That so normally you create a service in the so normally you create a service within a cluster, and the service be available within one cluster. But now with the multi-cluster service, you can create a service within one cluster, and then this service will be copied by the Antrea agent to other member clusters. So for example, I have a management cluster here, and I have the Antrea agent installed in each of the cluster. But in order to use the multi-cluster service, we also need something called and can everyone see this clearly? Let me make it larger. So so if you so so for example, if you want to use this multi-cluster feature, you need something called Antrea multi-cluster controller. And this is not deployed by Antrea agent. You need to use this multi-cluster controller.yaml to create this controller by yourself. And then after you have this one, and you also have the workload cluster. And they also call this workload cluster member cluster, if I remember it correctly. So and oh, by the way, and you also need to install this multi-cluster controller within each workload cluster. And then you will create the service as usual. And if you want to export this service, you need to deploy another CRD that is defined by this Antrea multi-cluster controller, which is called service export, I think. And then after you have this object created, this controller will notice that this one exists. And then this controller creates something called service export in the management cluster. And then this Antrea multi-cluster controller notice that there's like a resource export created, and it will create another thing called resource import. So all the objects here are the CRD defined by this Antrea multi-cluster controller. And then after you have that, there the other. So I only draw one workload cluster here, but actually you can have like several workload cluster or member cluster which is the official name that called in Antrea. So you have this here. Let me change this to number 3. And then yeah, so all the controllers in the member cluster will watch these resources. So so when they notice that there's a resource import created, they will like create a corresponding service import here, and the real service here. So this two will be created by this controller. And also the name of this auto-created controller will be called Antrea-MC- the service name, and the corresponding endpoint will be also be created. So that is the general idea of this multi-cluster service. And also that there's like there's two part in this. Oh, before I started that, so Jinjing, uh, does it like sounds correct to you that everything I said before?
Yeah, I believe so. By the way, I'm checking with Lan, and I think he will be able to join later. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for
Evaluation.
that. Okay. And then so if we want to take a closer look at this Antrea multi-cluster controller, there are two parts. One is the exporter and one is the importer. So this service export is like I think it's managed by this exporter, and when you want to create the service import, it's managed by the importer in this controller. So there are two parts inside this controller. Okay. And I also remember that Lan mentioned to me that there's a limitation of this feature is that so the we need but I didn't remember this correctly. So I didn't remember this clearly. So I think that the service the pod IP should be accessible across all the local cluster, right? So if you cannot do that,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yes, I can confirm. That's the limitation of the current version. But indeed, we
Okay.
are doing more enhancement. So later we can enable connectivity with tunnels and even encrypted tunnels between clusters. Then we will no more require the port IP can be directly reachable across clusters, but we will route the traffic through the tunnels between clusters.
Okay. So let me show the doc that you sent me that I can show the audience.
Yep. When you are opening the doc, just one more point to add. Actually, Smart Card Service is a tab in Kubernetes upstream. I also send a
Okay.
link in the chat, in the YouTube chat, so you guys can check that link. And Antrea just implementing that tab Smart Card Service API. Of course, we are also doing some of our own enhancements. If Lan will join later, maybe he will talk about this. But we are doing connectivity between clusters, and then we are doing net policy across clusters. But we are also trying to be compatible with this upstream multi-cluster service API. Yeah, that's what we're doing
Okay.
here.
Okay. Thanks for that. It's like great, good to know that there's also works on upstream about this.
Yeah,
And
so this was starting as a upstream cap, and I believe it wasn't merged that long ago. And essentially, the upstream multi-cluster definition of the service export and import is that a couple of clusters would form a cluster set in which all the clusters has some sort of like mutual understanding and trust,
Alright.
so that
Sorry for late
essentially
join.
I highlight.
Yeah, I thought it's 9 a.m. Sorry
No,
about that.
no worries. I was just explaining something real quick. Essentially, all the cluster in the cluster set, were treated as a like I wouldn't say the same cluster, but there are some mutual degree of understanding between what one namespace in a cluster and the other namespace. If they are of the same name, they're essentially meaning the same thing. So if you export one service one of namespace one in one cluster, and if you export service one in namespace one in another cluster, those two will be considered the same thing. And when you do the service import and export, the endpoints of both services in different clusters will be merged into one. So essentially, this is a single service, but spanned across different clusters. So now when you access the service, the back end of it might be low balanced between clusters, endpoints residing on different clusters rather than endpoints just in one cluster. And that's the basic idea behind the service import and export in the upstream cap. But I'll let Lan take over and explain this more.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks, Ding Yang, and sorry for joining this meeting late. And I will start my sharing and show more. I guess Ding Yang, you just show the basic concept, right, through this design.
Yeah, we just talk about some high level stuff. Polly, you can go
Yeah.
ahead to start your presentation.
Okay, cool. Let me share my screen. And,
By the way, this is the first Antrea live show for Lan, and welcome. So before we start, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself first?
Okay, thanks everyone. And I'm Luolan, and I'm from Beijing team. And I work when I joined Antrea, I almost start with Antrea Multi-cluster, so I'm familiar with this part. So I will introduce this part today. Give you an overview about this, and let me know if you have any question during my demo and introduction. Thanks.
Okay, let's go. Let's get started for that.
Okay, let me show my screen. Can you see my screen?
Let me find that. Yeah, here. Okay. So
Yeah,
before
cool.
you joined, we go over the mirror board that we draw in the rehearsal. Remember that? So we tell the audience a little bit about the high level picture of how
Yeah, that's right.
the management cluster, worker cluster, and how this controller created something like that. So I assume that people already have a little bit background about that, so you can go through the doc and the detail now.
So you mean that Ding already introduced this architecture?
I actually have not. I didn't introduce anything architectural wise. I was just talking about basic service import and export concepts, which is inherited from the upstream cap.
Okay, cool. I think in the upstream we have independent doc, the separate doc for this multi-cluster, and all of this multi-cluster you can see here. It's it's about multi-cluster. I will start from the architecture. Sorry, let me go back, and then give us an overview about this. That. Let me know if I should. Is that clear?
Yeah, that's
sounds
clear.
much better.
Okay, cool, thanks. That in a multi-cluster environment, so we usually talk about more than one cluster. And in traditional way to use Kubernetes, or when the developer use Kubernetes development environment, they will just use one single cluster. But when we goes to the production environment, usually there will be more and more more and more Kubernetes cluster, and different workloads running in different clusters. So here, it will be a problem when people goes to multi-cluster, especially some of the service. You know that the service is in single cluster. The concept, for example, the cluster IP type of service, it can only be accessed in one single cluster. For other cluster, it cannot access this kind of service directly. So in multi-cluster, we like to introduce a way to solve this kind of problem. And here, as you can see, that we have a basic architecture of our multi-cluster in Antrea. And we have one leader cluster in the bottom and the two member cluster here. Actually, you can have more than two member clusters in your ClusterSet. And we can have more information about ClusterSet concept. Usually, it's just a placeholder name to tell the people that there are a group of Kubernetes clusters. But in our multi-cluster, we have some class set. We also define it as CRD, and it will represent a group of clusters and those basic information about the cluster ID and the group of clusters, which one is the leader and which one is the member. Let's go to the API doc and okay, I guess as you can see here, we have a few new CRDs introduced in this multi-cluster feature, and we all released this in 1.5. And you know that for the class claim, it's actually used by the admin to claim one cluster itself as a member cluster or it's a layer cluster. Its mainly contains class ID and the name. And the class set, it actually contains different clusters, information including leader and the member. It's a little slight difference in member cluster and the leader cluster when we define the cluster set. But I will show you the difference later when I demo it. The member cluster it's actually when member cluster joins the leader cluster. Actually, it's talked successfully with the leader. Then it will have a member cluster announce CR created successfully in the leader. And we also have a few, there are actually 4 CRD here. I guess Jingyang already introduced this solid export import, right? Maybe I can skip this part. For the resource export and import here, it's mainly working in the leader cluster. It's actually, you can consider it's like a wrapper in the resource wrapper. It can have a different kinds of resource information in this CR, and it will be wrapped and then encapsulated. And also the resource import, this kind of information, it's actually sometimes the resource might be almost the same, the resource export import information. And some of them may be our leader cluster will do some works to do some conversion works to make sure they can transfer the resource export into resource import. Then other member cluster can know the resource import and import different resource. Okay. As I mentioned, the class claim is used to claim a cluster. It's just a simple information about the class ID and the name. Okay, let me move forward. And you know that Antrea multi-cluster are a little independent to the Antrea. And you can totally deploy this standalone deployment. It has a standalone deployment and a new manifest to deploy it. Yeah. Okay, I guess this part, have we introduced this part?
I think we talk about a little, but I think you can still talk about what's in your mind, and probably you can go through everything.
Okay, cool. Okay, thanks. Actually, in release 1.5, we mainly working on the service, the resource. We can have a different types of resource to export import, but we focus on service export import in 1.5. So here, as you can see, there is our two-member cluster. The left one, let's say that we have one service here named full. Oh, sorry. Full in the namespace NS, and it's it's already running and the service working, and the admin want to export, or he or her want to let other member cluster to know he has this kind of service, and would like to let others to access this service, then the admin can create the service export CR, and just include the service name and the namespace, and to tell our multi-class controller to say that, hey, I want to export this service. Then our exporter here, it's actually part of our cluster control, multi-class controller, but we draw it as an independent chart diagram here. But it's just one process. You can think about that, and it will watch the creation of the service export. Just like I mentioned before, it will create and wrap those service information like service and endpoint information to the leader cluster, and it will become the resource export. Once we create the resource export into the leader cluster, the leader cluster's controller will watch this kind of creation event. Then the resource it will do necessary computation or just converge them into almost the same resource import. In other member cluster, for example, in the right member cluster, the import or our multi-class controller will watch this kind of event in the leader cluster. Then it can create a corresponding service and endpoints locally. Then you can just access this kind of service almost exactly like other service. The only difference is that we actually add a prefix, let's say the Antrea MC -MC. So if you like to access the service, and then you need to add the right prefix, then you should be able to sorry, you should be able to access the service. But you know that it's a little limitation in our first release about service. It depends on the underlying network. We need to here. Sorry, yeah. As you can see here, we have a few little limitation in first release. The first, we support the class type, IP type, and the underlying network will require part IPs reachable between different member clusters, and also no IP overlapping. And of course, in the future, we may support more feature to maybe allow user to do the access directly with the data path change, and it's also in our plan. Yeah. Okay, maybe let's go to demo, or any question so far?
I think we're good. I don't see any questions in comments. And by the way, for all the audience, if you are the first time watching our show, you can sign into your YouTube account and leave us and leave the comments so we can like answer any questions you have or show your comments on the screen. Okay, I think we're good to go
Okay.
Yeah,
ahead
Lan,
and
I'm not sure what's your plan. You want to talk about multi-cluster policy too, or you want to do that after demo?
I actually I'm not so sure about time if it's enough or not. Maybe I can give it a simple introduction, or Ding Yang can help on this.
I already like talked to him today, and we will have like another episode
I
for
see.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
All right,
right.
that sounds
Okay.
good to me.
Okay,
Okay.
cool. Thanks. Okay, let me go to the demo. Okay, here actually I have three clusters in locally, and one of cluster will be our leader cluster, and also play as a member cluster. So I will show you later. And in the top panel, it will be our leader cluster and also member. Let me show you the ClusterSet.
By the way,
Oh,
could you
zoom.
zoom in a little bit? Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, let me. Okay. See, we have actually. Let me go back and get all parts here. As you can see, we actually have a two multi-cluster controller running. One is in this namespace, the Antrea MCSNS. It's our, you can treat it as our leader cluster or the leader namespace working as a leader controller. And this is another one. It's working in the Kubernetes system. And this one is play as a member controller. So this cluster actually acts as both leader and the member. And okay, let me go and see. As I mentioned before, we will have a class set and a class claim. Let's see how our claim has. See, we have two claim. One is actually claim the cluster itself as a leader. So let's go and see what we have here. As you can see, we have a name and namespace, and this is the ID. This is our predefined name. Then it means this is just the ID of the class member cluster or leader cluster. Here's the value. It's actually the ID of the leader. And you may say that, sorry, let's see another cluster claim. It's actually claim the class ID. Yeah, this one is you see this is a name, the resource name, and this is our predefined class ID name, and it means this value is just about the class set ID. Okay, let me go.
Question. What's that ClusterSet ID? It's just a name you gave to the member cluster?
Yeah, that's right, but it has to be consistent as the leader defined. We define this test cluster
No, I'm not asking that one. I'm asking for the just about namespace. You have a field called name, right? And the name is ClusterSet dash ID.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, this one is I think Bounty is working on that. So we need to refine this part. It's actually a little misleading and a little duplicated, and we can actually remove this or just remove this one and reuse here. Reuse this name. Yeah.
Got it.
So I also have another question here. So if we want to know that if this cluster is like a member or is a leader, we just need to check the values here, right? So if the value is the leader, it means that this
Actually, yeah, let's go back. You can see that the value here is the leader, but it's actually the user can define it. Uh, it's totally provided by user, so it can be test cluster without leader. It's just a value, but the user or the admin need to guarantee that the ID is unique. Actually, we're working on the ID uniqueness validation. In first release, we haven't this part, which means you may provide two duplicate or the same name for the two-member cluster. It's
I think I guess the question is more like from class claim, could we see which cluster is member and which one is leader?
Oh, I think we cannot do that. Class claim is just claim itself as what the ID it is. Actually, it's just the most useful information is the ID of this cluster set. Cluster. Let me go and show you the class set, and you may get a better idea about this. see we have this class set. Let's go and see. This is the status we can check later. And this is actually the spec, including both leader and the member. This one here, you can see this leader class ID, which you just we defined it and use the class claim to claim it itself as a leader. Actually, as a part of the class set, you can consider that. It's just use the class claim to define that hey, I am a cluster, and I will be one part of the class set named the test class set, and my ID is test cluster blah 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 like this. So when we use a class claim, it's just the claim indicated. It's just claim itself. My ID is my ID is what is my ID actually, and what is my class set ID. And only in the class set, this resource, what you see before is class claim. And in class set, we have the full information about which one is the leader and who is the member. And we also have some service account information, which those member cluster will be used to access the leader.
Yeah, it's clear that we can define who is the leader and who is the member here. But if we go back to the cluster claim, I think that there's like a name and a value. So
yeah, that's right.
So maybe you have not covered this before, but can you say that again? What is the name?
Yeah,
here
actually,
is the value, right?
Let's see here. It's actually the name. You can consider that this kind of claim is a claim that what's the class set ID I will join, or if you see this value as ID, then it's actually claim that which class set I will join. See, this is the class set ID, because here tell you that this class set dot Kubernetes and .io here. And but you see that let's go back and see here is another name. It's I think it's a little confused here. That's why we we like to refine these parts. When you see this here, it's ID, then it means this is the ID of this cluster. No matter it's leader or member, it has a unique ID, right? This is the ID of this cluster.
Yeah,
But
I think simply the
one,
name is a little confusing to me.
yeah,
For
that's right.
Its class claim is from upstream multi-cluster service API, right? It's not our own definition, right?
You mean the class claim?
Yes.
In upstream is defined by user.
Sure, but the schema is part of the MCS API, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's why we need to refine this part to also make them unique.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, let me go ahead. So we have a class set defined in the member cluster is actually almost the same class claim and a class set, but there are slight difference because in the leader you will assign the service account. You will point out which service account in your leader it will be used by the member, right? But in the member cluster, it will be another information is about the secret, which secret it will be used to access leader. So it's a little different. Let's say. See this the Kubu system is our actually the you can see it's a member cluster, or maybe let me go this cluster, and it's only play as a member cluster. So let's get.
Yeah, I think that's easier to understand. I mean,
yeah,
it's a little hard for me to switch the context when you use one class for both leader and the member.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, let me see. Let me check this, and as you can see, We also have a test cluster set. Actually, the name is not so important for now, but in the future, we might do some validation. Oh, sorry. Okay, as you can see here, here you can see in the member, it's actually just it's just concern about which one is its leader, right? Which one I should access. So it contains basic server access information, the address, and also another important is the information is a secret. This secret it's actually created manually by user so far, and you will see this and then you can see the member. Actually, you didn't see the full member list, right? Because in a member cluster, it's only need to tell the controller, say that, hey, I want to access this leader, and this is my class ID, or this is my ID to distinguish myself, right? And in the leader cluster is the whole picture, which the whole member cluster it has.
Just to confirm, its server actually is a Kubi API server address.
Yeah, that's right.
And the
that's
secret
right.
is used to authenticate with Kubi API server of the leader cluster.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
So the member cluster don't know that there's other member cluster exists.
Yeah, correct. But he can got those member information from the leader cluster. You can see leader. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, let's go back to the leader cluster. Or I see that it's because this one is actually play as a leader and a member. So I will, for now, I will treat it as a member and going to export one service. For now, as you can see, I already deployed Nginx service here in the default namespace, like this one, right? And I'm going to export it. As you can see here, I just defined a service export, and this is a name, and this is the namespace. It's actually this point to this service. It just tells the MC controller to say, hey, this is a service I like to export to tell other member I like to share to other to access, right? So let me apply it.
So this service export is a cluster scope object, right?
You mean no?
It doesn't have.
Its namespace is default. It's actually we didn't apply it. It's actually is a metadata, right? It's you can treat it the same as service, including name and the namespace. It has to be the same as the service. So let's say.
Okay, so the name and the namespace of the service export has to be the same with the.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, gotcha.
See, you can see we have this one, and then let's go to see what we have in the leader cluster, because we also have this one play as a leader. So let me see how many. Yeah, you can see that we have a new service and endpoint created a few seconds ago. And once we have a service exported, then the member cluster will watch this creation event and got those service and endpoint information and write into the leader cluster. Here, it's eventually become a resource export in the leader. Here you can see this namespace play as a leader. So we have these two service because a service in 1.5 we use endpoint the pod IP as endpoint of multi-class service. So we will have two kind of service here created. Then let's go and see what we have in the import. You will see that if there only one service and exported in one member cluster, these two actually are almost the same. They're even in the spec. let's see. Sorry.
So for each service we want to export, there will be 2 resource export created for that one service.
Yeah, that's right. Because we have a corresponding endpoint for the service, right? And in our current implementation, because we are using the pod IP as endpoint, so for the multi-cluster service, so we need this kind of information for other member. In the future, we will just use class IP. Then you may just see one resource export here.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me see. As you can see here, it's almost the service definition, and the most important thing is about the port. For the class IP, you can ignore it so far because it's actually not take any effect in our service access. And you know that as Dinya mentioned, the sameness, we need to make sure that all exported service have the same port definition. As you can see here, if you have the same namespace and service, like we all call it Nginx and as a default namespace, but one Nginx you use port 18 and another one you use 18, maybe 18.8, then it will not be converged successfully. One of the exported service will be rejected and not be exported to other member cluster, because we don't know which one is expected, right? Which port is expected. Okay, let me go to another member cluster. Let me go to see the service. Okay, as you can see here, we have a new service created here, and it's with a predefined prefix here. We have a new service Nginx, but it has our own prefix here, and the class IP is the local class IP. And let's go and see the endpoint. Sorry, let me try. Oh, this one? Oh, not this one. Interesting. Let me go back. Okay. Sorry. Yesterday I scaled it as a 0 replica. Let me. So you can see that if you export this, but you have no endpoint locally, then even you export it, it has nothing here, right? Let me scale our local deployment. Okay, you will see one replica, then you should be able to see one endpoint here. See, we have one endpoint here. Then let's go to check another member cluster. Okay, we have a new endpoint, right? It's the same as the endpoint in this member cluster. So, which means that's why we need to the limitation is that pod IP need to be reachable between member clusters because we're using the same endpoint IP, right? It means we need to communicate in each other's cluster. Okay, I hope I explain it clear. And let me scale. Let me go back and see here. This one. Sorry. Let me. It's a layer. Okay, let's see. This is another member cluster. As you can see, let's go back and see the member cluster. Here we can see we have East. You can see this one, the top one is the east, the west one is here, and the north cluster I defined this in this one. So I will show you that in this one, if I export the same Nginx service, how it will happen. Okay, let me see. I think I already deployed the Nginx service, so let me just export it. Yeah, we create this service export successfully. Then let's go back to see what we have in other member cluster and what we have in the leader cluster. In leader cluster, yeah, you will see we have a new service and endpoint type of resource export. This one is from the north, and this is his default namespace and the name service, and this is endpoint type and this service type. So let's go to this member cluster to see what we have now for the endpoint. You will see that there are almost no difference between the service. So the service won't be updated, but the endpoint, because we have a new member cluster exported this, then you will see we have a new endpoint here, right? There are two endpoints. Let's go back to check the north cluster and to see the EP. Oh, sorry. Oh, so get oh. Yes, you can see here we have Nginx, which is deployed in this one, and we have two endpoints right here. They are actually the same as this one, these two, right? So it's actually the whole scenario is that as long as one member cluster exported the same service, and it will be exported into leader cluster, and eventually it will be converged in the Kubernetes resource export. Let's say the resource, import. See, you will see there is no new resource import, right? Because that's we have the same service exported. So all the information have been converged in the same as a resource import. Let's say this resource import here. You will see this actually contains all the available addresses, which you actually see that they are reflecting here, right? Because the local member class controller is watching these resource imports. If it's a new created one, then it will create a local new service. If it's being updated like this one, we have a new update addresses, then it will be also reflected into local if it has a new one. So let me go back to delete this export. See, we no longer export this service, which means I don't want other member cluster to access my service anymore. Then the other member clusters endpoint will not be able to see this endpoint anymore. See, you will see this, it has been deleted, these two from the North member cluster.
So what if I delete one from the member cluster? I assume that only this cluster will be deleted. Only the endpoint in this cluster will be deleted, and it won't influence the other member cluster, right?
Sorry, you mean delete from this one? It
I
will be
mean,
none as we saw beginning.
I mean delete in the member cluster. If I delete one
Oh,
service,
if you delete this one directly, then it will gone. But when there is any change in other member cluster, it will be imported
recreated.
again. Yeah,
Okay, because there's like a controller watching this
yeah,
object.
that's right. That's right.
Okay, gotcha.
So if you don't want to import, then you can just exist to the class set, not join to the member class. Otherwise, if you deploy the multi-class controller, it's actually watch those events automatically.
Yeah, gotcha.
Mhm. Okay, I think that's all from my part.
Okay, thanks, Lan. It's like a really clear introduction of this multi-cluster service, and I learned a lot. It's really cool. It's a really cool feature. Thanks for bringing this to the Antrea. And
Mhm.
so we also have we probably don't have enough time, but maybe we can have like a quick short introduction of like the Antrea CLI, right? So we have like Jia here to join us to tell us a little bit about the CLI, so we can like give a short introduction, and then we will have another follow up episode about this Andrea CLI later. So just like a quick introduction is good enough.
Yeah, so you mean this time Jiajing will just give himself introduction, not about Encanto?
I mean, yeah. I mean, of course, can like tell us
Oh,
about
okay.
yourself because this is also Judging's first time to be
Mhm.
here with us. So, if you like to introduce yourself to the audience, we welcome that. And also, we probably don't have enough time to finish all the and
Yeah.
kernel things. Yeah, so we can like do a short beginning, and then we have like a follow up episode about this.
Okay. Hi. I'm Jiajing. I'm working in when I was with Lola, and I am working on the article feature about the multi cluster. Maybe my article multiple cluster feature is a feature that helps us to make it easier to deploy and create and maybe get query resources in the multiple cluster. Once you use this feature, you may not need to edit the some YAML files and other other configures in the local. Just run some commands. It is easier to deploy and get the resources in the multi-cluster. So maybe I can make an introduction to this feature next time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. And also in the follow up episode, we will also have Yang Ding with us to tell us a little bit about to tell us what's happening in this
The
entry.
policy.
Yeah, entry policy. It's like has like similar has like a similar behavior like the service. It also like create a network policy in all the member cluster like that. So we will of course invite him next time for that. And also I really want to thanks Jianjun, Yang Ding, Lanluo, and Judging Hu for today, because I know that I calculated time zone wrong, so it's like 8 a.m. for them when the show begins. So like really
Bad.
thank you.
Actually, double check that.
So really thanks for getting up early and join the show on to like show us everything that this fancy feature has. Okay, it's late for the folks in East Coast, and maybe we can
I
start.
still have 5 minutes, right, Xinqi?
Oh yeah,
So if that is okay, I want just give a very quick summary of this multicast feature we are doing. I think Lan just showed us the multicast service. Multicast service we support in the first version in Antrea 1.5. Actually, we're actively working on more features. As you said, probably last time Yang will show us multicast letter policy that we implemented in Antrea 1.6. It's already released. With that, it's very similar to multicast service. Basically, from leader cluster, you can export a global letter policy, and the policy will be imported by all the member cluster and applied under every member cluster to the local traffic of the member cluster. And probably that is our last major feature after multicast service. And then in Antrea 1.7, probably Lan also briefly mentioned that we're working on connectivity between clusters. So that will remove the major hard limit we have in the version 1 that will require all the ports are directly routable across clusters. It's typically not the case, right? Because ports are typically in some overlay network. They have private status of every member cluster, so they are not directly routable across clusters. So with 1.7, hopefully we can enable the connectivity across clusters with the tunnels between clusters. We will have gateway nodes. And then between gateway, we establish tunnels with GLEAV Western or GRE tunnels. And finally, we can also have IPsec for encryption, just in case you want to secure communication between clusters. And once we have that, then we will no more require the port IP can be directly routable between clusters. But all the traffic across clusters, for example, with multicast service access, can go through the tunnels between our gateway nodes. I think at that time, probably we can see this feature is more useful in the typical multicast scenario. And then the final one, probably Yang will also talk in his epic later. After this connectivity between clusters, we also want to enable what we call a stretched net policy. That means you can define a policy in one member cluster, but the policy can be applied to the traffic across clusters. For example, you can say in one cluster, I can define which ports in the cluster set, including the ports in the remote cluster, can access a particular service. In that way, you can really enable end-to-end security with Antrea letter policy model, just like what you can do in a single cluster. But now you can do the policy in the whole cluster set, apply to the traffic across clusters. Yeah, just want to give a heads up for all the upcoming features to make our introduction more complete.
Yeah, that is very exciting to hear that we have like the whole plan here for all these fancy features. And yeah, so before we end, is there any questions, or is there anyone that want to say something about these features?
Yeah, so people ask some questions, but seems Yang answered them in the chat pretty well.
Yeah, I think Yang helps a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining us today. See you next week. Bye.
Yeah, see you
Bye.
guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.